First, I want to give a shout out to FirstSnowz here, who put out a Reddit post earlier today regaling us about their tier 21 clear with their blight-powered Infinimus Necromancer build. They're getting crazy damage numbers out of it. They kind of give an entire story of their experience, what they're doing, why they're stopping at this point. But they've cleared tier 21, and the reason why you want to go check out this post is because they talk a lot about snapshotting on the Necromancer, something that seems to really be, regulated to barbarians and sorceresses for all the different things that they can snapshot, including their Paragon boards. And one of the things that people started theorizing about was how we could snapshot anything on the Necromancer itself. People went ahead and tested just about every single aspect, and it looks like only of elements, the one that swaps between physical damage and shadow damage, can snapshot. We can't snapshot our blighted aspect or decay aspect, anything like that. So sadly, those don't seem to work. But what the Reddit post supposes and what it seeks to prop up is this concept that you can snapshot the Shadowblight key passive, the damage multiplier from damage over time, as well as the Wither node in our Paragon system, because the Wither node looks very similar to the Barbarian node that can be snapshotted, but they put together a great amount of sources for what they are citing, the testing that they did, how they went about their testing, and ultimately what they hope that their takeaway is. So I thought, first off, all this is fantastic. I love the way that they did this post. It's a phenomenal post. Also, again, shout outs GG on the tier 21 clear. That's awesome. If you haven't already, go check out Eldritch Limb, go check out FirstSnowz, and go give their YouTubes a subscriber, because it would just help them out a lot. But you should go give them some love, because they're putting an amazing amount of time and effort into looking into things for the Necromancer. But my first question wasn't, hey, let's just go test this, right? Because obviously we should test it, and we're going to test it, and I'll get to that in a second. But what does it mean if we can snapshot these things? Because I started coming up with some pretty crazy concepts of what we could seek to snapshot if this was true, and how we could better improve upon this. It might make the game effectively unplayable for most people because of the ridiculous amount of min-maxing that you would have to do. But if you can do something, I'm at the very least going to try to do that thing. So let me go ahead and break down what I'm talking about, because it really hinges on a couple different things that ultimately I was able to prove don't work at all, which is very good, but opened up a ton of doors. So for my crazy scheme to work, we first had to look at glyphs. Most notably glyphs that give an additional bonus whenever you meet a requirement in your Paragon board, as well as very specifically the Tears of Blood glyph. Because if we're able to snapshot certain things in our Paragon board, if we're able to snapshot things in our skills and our aspects, what about the glyphs themselves? Let me walk you through the idea here, right? Control glyph says that you're going to gain additive damage for crowd controlled targets, and you're also going to gain a multiplier, whether or not you slow or stun a target. What if I were to tell you that getting the minimum requirement for this glyph activated and then removing intelligence nodes from around it would actually snapshot that bonus? That'd be pretty crazy, right? Well, luckily, that doesn't work at all. You can't snapshot your glyph, and I did a very quick test to be able to, prove that this is the case. And I'll just show you that data and how I went about doing it, because how I do this test is going to be relevant for the rest of what I cover in this video. So the first part was a very, very simple test. We walked up to a test dummy. I hit them with bone splinters a whole bunch to be able to get a damage range over average. So with the gear that I had on, I was doing 47 to 80 damage as my damage range. Pretty simple cut and try. Having an activated control glyph on it had an expected damage increase from 92 to 157, and our testing showed a damage range of 93 to 154. So at the very least, the glyph is working as intended when you put it on. You get the additional damage to crowd control targets, and if you apply a slow to them, you get the additional damage multiplier. Now, the next set of results would be trying to prove whether or not deactivating the glyph, as in taking out stats from around the Paragon board itself, would still give us the benefits as if the glyph was activated. So in that case, if we were expecting to lose the damage multiplier, we would expect to do 78, basically 80, to 135 damage. And when we ran the tests, we were doing 80 to 132 damage. So what does that mean? That means that the glyph cannot be deactivated after loading into a zone, whether it be an Abattoir of Zir, a Nightmare Dungeon, or just into the testing facility in Kiovashad, and continue to benefit from it. So right here, the conclusion, control glyph, and I assume all glyphs, are updated in real time based on changes in the Paragon board. So it does not snapshot, and you do not gain the additional bonuses. Now, I said that this is actually a good thing. And why did I say this was a good thing? Well, before we get to that, and sorry for dragging you along, let's talk about the Tears of Blood, which was the only other thing that I thought might work similarly to the Wither Paragon legendary node and the Barbarian legendary nodes and other stats which are being snapshotted. So the reason why I thought that the Tears of Blood may work differently than a different glyph here is that the bonus that it confers to you is a multiplier first and foremost, and it's not based off of any bonus requirements here, right? It's just if you have stats around it, you gain a bonus multiplier to your damage, whereas Control says that you gain additive damage for stats around it, and then you have an additional bonus requirement met, right? You can see how these two things are clearly coded differently. They have different requirements to be able to reach them. So I went and did the exact same test where I put in a Tears of Blood node, I completely maxed it out, I got my damage results, and then I removed every other stat from around it, ran the damage numbers again, and luckily, although sadly, Tears of Blood is also not snapshotting. But remember, this is a good thing, because FirstSnowz post supposes that Wither node can be snapshotted. And while a lot of people have been able to put on like a ton of intelligence onto their character through a bunch of stats, and then your amulet having a percentage multiplier, and then from the Paragon board, I don't think anybody went to the extreme of what I thought of. Do you know how much intelligence in nodes there is available in the Paragon system? Not in glyphs, not in just the rare nodes. No, how many clusters of intelligence nodes you can actually get to in the Paragon board? The answer is a lot more than I thought, if I'm going to be quite honest with you. In fact, if you were to go board by board, you would find out that Cult Leader actually has the most intelligence available to you in the game, with 310 total intelligence in that board. Luckily, Wither is actually pretty high up there. It's the third highest total concentration of intelligence in your Paragon board, with a total of 280. Now, to be able to get all of these nodes of intelligence is going to use up a ton of Paragon points, which would be a problem if we had to keep all of our glyphs active because they were all snapshotting. But your glyphs do not snapshot, meaning that theoretically we could actually put as many points into intelligence as possible throughout the entirety of our Paragon board, and as long as we keep the Wither node active, probably it being our second board, you can fill out the entirety of your board with all the intelligence possible, then wear as much intelligence and all stats together with a huge multiplier from a piece of gear, and you end up with something like 1458 intelligence. Now, the funny part here is I'm actually missing a ton of intelligence from my character right now. I don't have all stats on my armor, they're not max rolls on my helmet, I'm missing my gloves as well as my pants. My boots are pretty high up there, and my amulet is close to perfect, and my two-handed weapon is close to perfect. But if you were, I don't know, an absolute lunatic who wanted to put in every single point that they possibly could to your Paragon board, be able to pick up as many high-value intelligence clusters of nodes, you could reach pretty insane amounts of intelligence. Realistically, I think this caps out somewhere around like 1600. But what you could then do is point by point, remove all of these, and then completely recreate your Paragon board the way that it should, because we've snapshotted the Wither node itself to get the biggest total bonus out of this. That is something you could do if the Wither Paragon node snapshotted. From all of my testing, Wither does not snapshot at all. In fact, Shadowblight Key Passive also does not snapshot. Now, I did my testing both with Decompose and Blighted Corpse Explosion. They didn't show any different results between the two of them, but let me just show you in real time this type of testing. And just to make sure that I'm covering every single base, I'm going to completely reload the character to show you how we're going about doing the testing. All right, so let's go up to the testing dummy. And again, just in case you're wondering like, oh, maybe it's a testing dummy thing, I went into a nightmare dungeon that was freshly loaded. I've done this out in the open world as well. There's just no way of getting this to work, but this is as close to approximating loading into an Abattoir of Zir dungeon or a nightmare dungeon, since you're loading into a combat area that is fresh in a single instance. And let's just go ahead and look at what our damage looks like, and then when it ticks for the additional damage, let's see what that looks like. And just to look at our stats right now, other than my all damage of 30, I have no other damage sources that are relevant for our testing right now. And since I do have damage to close on my two-hander, I'll go ahead and stay nice and far away from the target. But I'll hold this damage down. We're doing 534 damage per our tick on Decompose. And then we just dealt 865 damage. So if we were to take these two damage numbers and multiply them together, you'll see that our max damage is 62% higher than our min damage. Pretty cut and dry there, right? That's what our Wither legendary node should be giving us as a damage multiplier. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put on a ton of intelligence gear and run the exact same test just so you can see what it looks like. So I'm going to put on this two-hander with all stats and intelligence, a intelligence multiplier on the amulet, all stats and intelligence here, here, and here, and we'll do it again. We'll reload the character, we'll leave the game entirely, and we'll go back in to see what the damage bonus looks like. Alrighty, so here's our character. We're loading in with all this gear. We're going to have a huge amount of additional intelligence, and our Wither node is going to show a 98% damage multiplier. And then again, because this is supposed to snapshot, we're going to take off all of that gear. Boop, 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 boop. We're going to put on a weapon that has none of those stats on it. You'll see we have drastically reduced intelligence. And while the tooltip shows a much lower damage number, the idea is that the stats have been snapshotted. We don't need to worry about it. So let's go ahead and get those damage numbers now. We're doing 387 and 627. 387, 627. And this is equal to our maximum divided by our minimum. And we're doing 62% bonus damage, even though we have snapshotted a much higher amount of intelligence. Now, I hear you. That might just be decompose. If I've changed nothing else, I still should have successfully snapshotted, right? You saw me literally do that. I walked in with the gear, I took off the gear. Let's go ahead and cast Corpse Explosion here. We're doing 163 damage and then 264. 163, 264. And this is equal to this divided by this, and we're doing 62% bonus damage. We have not succeeded at snapshotting the Wither legendary node. That's kind of cut and dry as far as I'm concerned. But what about damage over time for our Shadowblight? What else could we be missing here? Let's go ahead and show that testing, and sadly it came to the same conclusion. So for this part, we need a ton of damage over time. So I have a big roll of damage over time on a two-hander with damage over time in the jewels. I have damage over time on my gloves. I have an X-Falls ring for damage over time. And then I have damage over time on this ring. And what we should be able to show is an increase to our Shadowblight key passive, which is a multiplier of 118%. So once we take off all of this gear, we should go from doing our base damage to 118% bonus of that base damage. It should be fairly simple to test. So we walk in, we fresh load the same way that we just did the Wither legendary node, and then again, taking off my gear, boop, 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 putting on a different weapon, and I'll walk up here and we'll wait until Shadowblight key passive is procced. And just to give you an idea of how much damage the average of our Shadowblight key passive was doing under these same circumstances. Testing here, we showed a pretty decent amount of valuable data, but what we got out was a minimum Shadowblight damage of 374, a maximum of 584 with an average, and then our range. The range is within the 50% damage bonus of our weapon, which is really good. And then after that damage, with the 118% damage multiplier, here are our expected min, max, and averages. So we minimum should be doing 800 damage with Shadowblight using the exact same setup, because we should have just snapshotted basically a over doubling of our total damage bonus. So we'll go ahead and use Decompose. You're going to look for a damage number to shoot out of the top right. After 10 instances, right there you just saw 355 damage. We'll wait again. 407 damage. We'll do it one more time. 353 damage. So you'll notice that I very quickly stopped doing my testing over here. I stopped getting data because, again, minimum, we should go from doing the lowest possible damage that we ever could with our previous test to over double that damage, because we have 118% damage multiplier for Shadowblight. Fresh load of the character, no damage over time on to begin with, so we shouldn't be snapshotting in this regard. Showing a 0% on our Shadowblight. And let's just go ahead and look at what the base damage was with this exact same setup. And we'll wait for the damage again to just pop out the top right of the training dummy here. And 395. So that's where this data came from. After running the test, this is where our data came from. And again, if we were legitimately getting the 118% bonus damage as we would expect here, this damage number is our new minimum expected value. There's no way for us to be doing 300 to 400 damage here. But what if we went just a little bit further? Just make sure that we do get the damage numbers that we're expecting to get here, right? Let's toss on all of the damage. And then let's hit this training dummy. And let's see what our Shadowblight damage does coming out the other side. 949 damage. So that would be within the range of what we were expecting, and that's with putting on all the damage. I can't actually put on this ring because it also has elements on it, so we don't want to be messing around with an additional aspect. Putting on the gear gets us the damage expectation that we should see. Trying to snapshot it doesn't work, and the base damage is properly representative of what the pre-snapshot damage should have been. So that's kind of it. The snapshotting just doesn't work. And this is not a slam against FirstSnowz post at all, because I understand how you would come to this conclusion. It's really tricky to test things unless you sit down and get huge sets of data in completely controlled circumstances. I think that I've proven that this does not work. I've been sitting here again with people in chat who've been watching me during all the testing. We've been doing this now for about 3 hours, just to be able to go through different circumstances. Again, I went into a nightmare dungeon, got the exact same results, tested with decompose and bloody corpse explosion, every single ridiculous thing that you could think to do, and I just can't find anything. Glyphs do not snapshot, Tears of Blood does not snapshot, Wither Node does not snapshot, Shadowblight does not snapshot. Other than elements, I can't find anything else that does snapshot for the Necromancer. So what I would like to see from you all down in the comments, perhaps in the Reddit thread, anywhere that you want to get in touch with me, the Discord, the links are all down in the description below. Let me know if you have run any tests that have shown empirical data that supports a form of snapshotting for the Necromancer class. And let me just be completely transparent here. I'm reporting all this off to the developers, because snapshotting is not meant to work like this in a game, in any game. I don't have any moral objection to it, it's just not intuitive. It doesn't lead to the best gameplay experience. Players don't know, to their detriment often, that they're accidentally snapshotting either stats or aspects, depending on what class they're playing, and getting different results when they technically run the same test multiple times. So I would love to hear from anybody in the community that has data to back up claims of any form of snapshotting that the Necromancer has available to it. I'd like to get this sent off to the developers. I'd like for this to ultimately be removed from the game, because I think that just leads to poor gameplay experiences. But let me know down in the comments what your experience has been, what you think about this testing. You think that there's something that I should cover in greater detail. If you have anything to say, I'd love to hear from you. As always, if you're brand new to the channel and you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe. I'm trying to bring this level of quality to all of the testing and theory crafting and builds that I do here in my personal channel, as well as on Maxroll. And subscribing to the channel is just a great way to tell YouTube that, like, hey, this content's good, I'd like to see more of it. Similarly, if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and leave a like on the video as well. That helps me out a huge amount. But as always, thank you so much for watching this video. I truly hope that it helps, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.